Hey everyone, it's Jan from the Coverstitch. Are you curious about which is the fastest and the best ways to assemble PDF patterns? Well, that I'd love to know myself. So in today's video I will test 4 different ways of assembling a PDF pattern, and I'm going to time them, and then I'm going to give you a review about which one that I prefer, and of course which one was the fastest. So this is how this experiment is going to pan out. I'm going to print out 8 pages of a PDF pattern, and I'm pretty excited because this is actually my own sewing pattern, the Aila leggings, which I'm launching very shortly, so stay tuned for more info about that. And the 8 pages are 2 rows, so I'm going to put together 4 pages and then 4 pages again, and I'm going to assemble these so I actually have 2 rows. I think that gives a good fair test that is very close to a real life example. Now of course most PDF patterns will be more than 8 pages, but I think at least in the purpose of testing this will give a pretty good idea how the different methods compare. And the methods I'm going to try out are the following. The first one is perhaps the most classic one, where you basically cut away along the borders of all sides of the paper. That I suspect will take longer, but who knows. The second method is, I think, the most common one, is where you cut away about 50% of the edges so that you overlap, but you don't cut all the 4 sides of the paper. That obviously I think would be faster, but again, who knows. The third one is to just clip the corners and then overlap the edges, the longer edges. So that would probably, I think, be a bit faster. The fourth and final version is the fold version, which you don't really need a pair of scissors, at least not for about half of it. Just fold along the edges and then you overlap. Again, I can imagine this will be a bit quicker. And as a bonus part of this experiment, I will also try both using a glue stick and regular tape and see which one I actually prefer and the pros and cons. So I'm really curious to find out the result of this test. So let's go! So I figure you're pretty curious now about how I felt about the 4 different ways of assembling. The first one definitely took the longest time. It wasn't a huge difference between using that one and the other ones. It was about 1 minute longer, approximately about 30 to 60 seconds longer than the other, compared to other assembly methods. I would say that the biggest disadvantage with this is because you're cutting away everything, you have to be really precise, just cutting at the right spot along the lines, because then otherwise you will either have a really problem, aligning them, because if you cut a little bit wobbly you won't get a straight line, and secondly if you cut too much it will actually eat into the pattern and there's no way of adjusting that afterwards. So I would say 100% that is my least favorite method and not something I personally use, and I won't start using it as well. It just takes too much time and it just opens up for more errors, I would think, compared to the other 3 methods. So the second one, which is similar to the first one, but it gives a lot more control because you're only cutting away one side and then you overlap. Because that means that if you get a little bit out of line, you can easily adjust it by just moving the paper above the folded layer. So I would say this one is way better, especially if you're starting out assembling PDF pattern. I would definitely recommend that you start with this method because that gives you a lot of control. It does save a bit of time also compared to the first one. Not too much, but at least a little bit of time. And for the second one, I also switched from tape to glue stick. And if I would say 2 things about this one, I would say that glue stick gives more control because it's very easy to move the pieces around if you find them that are a little bit off. That can also happen when you're starting to pile up the rows. Then it's usually where you start to get some type of misalignment. So in that way, glue stick I think gives you more control. The drawback with, I had some cheap glue stick, I didn't feel like it's kept the paper put as much, because when it started to dry, actually the paper started slipping a little bit, so I ended up having to tape some of the pieces when I was using glue stick. So I would say I still prefer glue stick. I find it's faster and perhaps it's better for the environment. I do feel a little bit odd about using so much plastic tape in my head, but please correct me if I'm wrong. I think that a glue stick would be a more sound choice for the environment. So that's also a reason why I actually prefer using a glue stick over tape. But of course, please correct me if I'm wrong about this one. If you have any other ways of keeping the paper put, I'd love to know. And the third option was cutting the corners, the newest method, and I was really impressed with this one because it is faster than the first two. It gives you as much control as the second method where you overlap. I did find it a little bit difficult when you were assembling row number 2, and I ended up messing that a little bit around because I'm unused to this method. But I would say among the 3 ones that I've talked about so far, this is by far the favorite method, I would say. And for the 4th one, well, the fold method. Again, this is a really quick method. You don't really have to cut, you just have to be kind of precise when you're folding. Again, you have lots and lots of control, because if you haven't folded exactly even, you can just, you know, readdress the fold, which is one of the reasons I think that this method gives a lot of flexibility. Also, the fact that you don't have to cut the entire side, it saves time. The main drawback of using the fold method is that it does create a lot of bulk, especially when you start to pile the layers and the rows on top of each other. So I actually ended up cutting the longer line when I was assembling the 2 rows. I actually cut that line away, because when I was folding it, I got such a big bulk of folded paper that it was really hard to manage. And especially if you want to maybe do some pattern alterations, such as using like folding the pattern for shortening parts of it, then the bulk would sort of end up being a bit unmanageable. So I think if you're going to use the fold method, I would definitely recommend that you combine that with cutting the top part of each row as well, and overlapping that just as you do in the method 2. So these were the 4 methods I've tried today. Now I'd love to know, what are your favorite methods of assembling PDF patterns? And also, have you tried another method where I didn't describe there? And by the way, I also know that you can get those like paper cutters for home use, where you like chop the paper like that. And if you're using one of those and also have perhaps a recommendation for a good brand to buy for us home sewists, then I'd really like to know, because that's obviously something I can imagine is way more precise than using a pair of scissors. Because for me, for instance, I do have a problem, actually, despite the fact that I've been sewing for over 30 years, I still have a problem with cutting along straight lines. It kind of get a little bit wobbly, especially if the scissors I'm using aren't really top notch. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and please subscribe for weekly sewing videos. And of course, stay tuned for more information about my upcoming sewing pattern, which is currently being tested. Stitch safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye!